Sometimes, the moment you feel the happiest is the exact moment fate begins to take everything away. The city stretched endlessly beneath the penthouse windows, a sea of lights glowing like distant stars. But up here, nearly 1,000 feet above the streets, everything felt strangely quiet, as if the world below could not reach them. Eli stood barefoot by the glass, his reflection faint against the skyline, his fingers lightly touching the cool surface as he watched the traffic move like a slow, endless current, and behind him, Cale moved through the space with the same controlled presence that made entire boardrooms fall silent. To the outside world, Cale was untouchable, a man who built his empire with precision and never allowed emotion to interfere, someone who did not believe in love, did not believe in anything he could not control. Yet here, in this private space, something about him softened in ways no one else was allowed to see. Without a word, he stepped closer, his hand lifting almost unconsciously before resting against Eli's lower abdomen. The gesture so natural it felt like instinct rather than choice. Eli's breath caught slightly, a quiet warmth spreading through his chest as he glanced back over his shoulder, a small, almost shy smile forming on his lips. "You always do that," Eli said softly, his voice gentle, carrying no accusation, only quiet curiosity. Cale paused for a moment, his brows drawing together just slightly as if he had not even realized what he was doing, his hand still resting there as though it belonged. "Do what?" he asked, his tone low, steady, but lacking the cold edge he carried everywhere else. Eli hesitated, then shook his head, choosing not to explain, because some things felt too fragile to define, especially when they felt this right. The moment passed quietly, like so many others they had shared, small and unspoken, yet filled with something deeper than either of them had ever acknowledged aloud. The next morning arrived gently, sunlight spilling across the polished floors, soft and golden, a rare kind of warmth that made the penthouse feel almost like a home instead of a carefully constructed space of control. Eli stood alone in the bathroom, staring down at the small test in his trembling hands, his heartbeat loud in his ears, each second stretching longer than the last. 2 lines. Clear. Unmistakable. For a moment, he could not breathe, the world around him fading into silence as the meaning settled in, slow and overwhelming, his fingers tightening slightly, as if afraid it might disappear if he let go. "This is real," Eli whispered, his voice barely audible, his free hand instinctively moving to his abdomen, pressing lightly as if trying to connect with something that was already there. A quiet laugh escaped him, fragile and unsteady, quickly followed by the sting of tears he did not try to stop. Happiness flooded through him, bright and undeniable, but it was tangled with something else, something quieter, sharper, a fear he could not fully name. "We are going to be a family," he murmured, his voice trembling now, a soft smile breaking through despite everything. He lifted his gaze to the mirror, his reflection staring back at him with eyes that held both hope and uncertainty, and after a long moment, he nodded to himself, as if making a promise he could not take back. "I will tell him tonight," Eli said quietly, determination settling into his voice, even as his fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the sink. He could already imagine it, the way Cale might react, the way that unreadable expression might shift, maybe just slightly, maybe enough to show something real, something that belonged only to them. Eli exhaled slowly, trying to steady the storm of emotions inside him, unaware that this moment, this fragile, hopeful decision, was the last piece of peace he would have before everything began to fall apart. Sometimes, the person who hurts you the most is the one who no longer remembers loving you at all. The news reached Eli like a sudden drop beneath his feet, a call that turned the fragile warmth of that morning into something cold and unreal. And by the time he arrived at the hospital, his hands were already shaking, his thoughts tangled with fear he could not control. The hallway felt endless, each step heavier than the last, until he finally reached the door and pushed it open, his breath catching the moment he saw Cale awake. Relief surged through him instantly, overwhelming and desperate. As he stepped closer, his voice soft but unsteady. "Cale, you are okay." For a brief second, everything felt suspended, Eli holding on to that moment as if it could anchor him. But then Cale turned his head, his eyes meeting Eli's with a look that shattered everything. There was no recognition, no warmth, only distance. "Who are you?" The words fell quietly, but they cut deeper than anything else could have, Eli's entire body going still as if time itself had stopped. "It is me." Eli, he said quickly, his voice breaking despite his effort to stay calm. Taking a step closer, as if that could fix what was broken. We live together. You remember, right? Cale's gaze hardened slightly, not with anger, but with cold detachment, as if he was evaluating something insignificant. No, he replied, his tone flat and certain. I do not. Something inside Eli collapsed in that moment, silent but complete, leaving behind a hollow ache that spread through his chest. The days that followed only deepened that fracture. Cale returned to his life as if nothing had changed, reclaiming control over his empire, his routines, his decisions, but Eli no longer existed within that world in any meaningful way. Every conversation became distant. Every glance felt like rejection. When Eli tried to explain, tried to hold on to what they had once been, Cale only responded with quiet skepticism, sometimes even faint irritation. There is no proof of any relationship, Cale said one evening, his voice calm but cutting, standing across from Eli like they were strangers discussing terms. You expect me to accept this without evidence? Eli's fingers trembled slightly, one hand instinctively pressing against his abdomen before he forced himself to stay still, to protect what Cale did not know. It was real, Eli whispered, his voice fragile but stubborn. We were real. Cale's expression did not change. That is not how reality works, he answered coldly. From that moment on, Eli stopped trying to convince him. He swallowed the truth about the child, locking it away like something too precious to be destroyed by disbelief, and instead chose to stay, clinging to a hope so fragile it hurt just to hold on to it. That one day, Cale might remember. And sometimes, it almost felt possible. Late at night, Cale would stand outside Eli's door, his hand hovering as if pulled by something he could not explain, a silent conflict between instinct and logic, but every time, he turned away, leaving only fading footsteps behind. Eli would sit in the dark, his hand resting over his abdomen, whispering softly, Please, just remember me. But morning always came, and with it, the same cold distance. Until the rumors began. They spread quietly at first, twisting Eli into something he was not, turning whispers into judgment, and when the confrontation came, it came without mercy. In a room filled with executives, under harsh lights and colder eyes, Cale stood at the head of the table, composed and distant, his voice steady as he spoke. There have been concerns regarding inappropriate conduct. Eli felt every gaze fall on him, his chest tightening as he stepped forward, his voice trembling but firm. That is not true. You know that is not true. Cale did not look at him. I do not rely on assumptions, he replied, his tone final. Only on what is presented. Cale. Eli tried again, but the name felt wrong in the air now, unfamiliar and out of place. Address me properly, Cale said coldly, cutting him off without hesitation, before delivering the words that ended everything. You no longer have a place here. Effective immediately, you are dismissed. Silence filled the room, heavy and absolute, and in that moment, surrounded by judgment and indifference, Eli realized that he had not only lost the man he loved, he had lost the only place he had ever called home. Some people leave your life all at once, and some leave while still breathing, still standing right in front of you. The rain fell harder than Eli remembered, cold drops soaking through his clothes within seconds as he stepped out of the building, the glass doors closing behind him with a quiet finality that felt louder than anything else. He did not look back. He could not. His hand trembled as it moved protectively over his abdomen, holding onto the only thing he had left, the only proof that what they had shared was ever real. Each step felt heavier than the last, his chest tight, his vision blurred not just by the rain, but by something deeper, something breaking apart inside him piece by piece. It is okay, Eli whispered softly, though he did not know if he was speaking to himself or the life growing within him, his voice unsteady but determined. I am here. I will protect you. That promise became the only thing that carried him forward. By the time the city disappeared behind him, reduced to distant lights fading into darkness, Eli had already made his choice. He would not go back. He could not stay in a place where every corner reminded him of someone who no longer remembered him at all. The coastal town he arrived in was quiet, untouched by the relentless pace of the city, where the air smelled like salt and the sound of waves replaced the constant noise of traffic and ambition. It was a place where no one asked questions, where a stranger could exist without explanation, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Eli allowed himself to breathe. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, He built something new from nothing. A small art shop near the shoreline became his refuge, its windows filled with paintings that captured the endless ocean, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, mirroring the emotions he could not put into words. He worked through exhaustion, through loneliness, through the quiet ache that never truly left, because he had something to hold on to now, something that needed him. "We are going to be okay," Eli would murmur at night, sitting by the window as the waves rolled in under the moonlight, his hand resting gently over his abdomen. "I promise." But promises did not make things easy. The nights were the hardest, long and silent, stretching endlessly as his body grew weaker, the strain of carrying new life weighing on him in ways he had never imagined. There was no one beside him, no hand to hold, no voice to reassure him, only the sound of the ocean and his own breathing, steady and determined, even when it felt like too much. The night his child was born, the storm outside echoed the turmoil within him, wind pressing against the windows, rain falling in relentless waves, and inside that small room, Eli faced everything alone. His fingers clenched tightly against the sheets, his breath uneven as he forced himself to endure, to stay conscious, to hold on for the sake of the life he refused to lose. "Just a little longer," he whispered through trembling breaths, his voice barely audible. "Please, just a little longer." And then, finally, it was over. Silence settled into the room, heavy and fragile, broken only by the soft, unmistakable sound of new life. Eli's arms trembled as he held the child close, exhaustion washing over him. In waves, tears slipping down his face without resistance as he looked down at the tiny face resting against him. For a moment, everything else faded away, the pain, the loneliness, the past he had tried to leave behind. But then he felt it. A scent. Familiar. Unmistakable. Eli froze, his breath catching as realization settled in, his heart tightening in a way that was both beautiful and painful at the same time. "You smell like him," Eli whispered softly, his voice breaking into something fragile, his fingers gently brushing against the child's cheek. "Even now, you are still connected to him." And in that quiet moment, holding the one thing that tied him to a past he could not forget, Eli understood something he could not change. No matter how far he ran, no matter how much he tried to start over, a part of Cale would always remain with him. The body remembers what the mind refuses to accept. Back in the city, everything continued exactly as it always had. Meetings, decisions, numbers moving across screens, power shifting with a single word. Yet for Cale, something was undeniably wrong. It started as a quiet discomfort, a subtle emptiness that he could not explain, a feeling that something was missing, though he had no memory of ever losing it. Nights became restless. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by fleeting sensations he could not grasp, the echo of a presence, the warmth of someone standing too close, gone the moment he reached for it. "This is inefficient," Cale muttered one night, standing alone in the penthouse, his hand pressed lightly against the glass as he stared at the city below, frustration tightening his voice, because nothing in his world was supposed to feel incomplete. And yet it did. Days passed, and the feeling only grew stronger. Familiar places began to feel unfamiliar in a different way, not because he did not recognize them, but because they seemed to carry something just beyond his reach. A corner of a hallway, a chair by the window, the space outside a closed door where he would pause without knowing why, his hand hovering for a second before he forced himself to move on. There is nothing there, he would tell himself, his voice firm, controlled, but the unease never left. Until the day everything shifted. It was a small gallery, one he would normally ignore, tucked between larger buildings, but something pulled him inside, something quiet but insistent. The moment his eyes landed on the painting, his breath caught. The ocean stretched across the canvas, endless and alive, each brushstroke carrying an emotion he could not name, yet somehow understood. "Why does this feel?" Cale stopped, his hand lifting slightly as a sharp pressure built behind his eyes. Not pain, but something overwhelming, something breaking through. A memory tried to surface, fragmented, incomplete, slipping through his grasp like water. "Who painted this?" he asked, his voice lower now, almost urgent. "A local artist," the gallery owner replied casually. "Lives out by the coast." That was all it took. The drive felt longer than it should have, but Cale did not slow down, the pull in his chest guiding him forward, stronger with every mile, until the city disappeared behind him and the sound of waves replaced everything else. When he finally stood in front of the small art shop, something inside him hesitated, just for a moment, as if crossing that threshold would change everything. Then he stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed softly, and before he could take in his surroundings, a small figure ran toward him, fast and fearless, tiny arms wrapping around his leg as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Cale froze. "Dad," the child said clearly, looking up with bright eyes that mirrored his own. The word hit him harder than anything else had, his breath catching as the world seemed to stop around him. "What did you say?" Cale asked, his voice quieter now, uncertain in a way that did not belong to him. "Dad," the child repeated, smiling. Something deep inside Cale reacted instantly. Instinct overriding logic, his hand lifting almost on its own before resting gently on the child's head, and in that single touch, the pressure behind his eyes surged again, stronger this time, closer to breaking. "Noah," a voice called softly from behind, and Cale looked up, his gaze locking onto the figure standing a few feet away. Eli. Time seemed to freeze. The air between them felt heavier than anything he had ever experienced, something raw and unspoken filling the space. Cale did not remember him, not truly, but his body did. His heart began to race without warning, his breath uneven as something deep within him responded, powerful and undeniable, a pull he could not ignore. "Who is he?" Cale asked, his voice unsteady now, his gaze flickering between the child and Eli. Eli's expression tightened, something distant settling into his eyes as he answered quietly, "That does not matter anymore." The words were calm, but they carried a finality that Cale could not accept, because for the first time in his life, he felt something slipping beyond his control, and he had no idea how to stop it. Memories do not disappear. They wait, buried, until something forces them back to life. The moment Cale's hand touched the child, everything broke. It was not gradual, not gentle, but overwhelming, like a flood crashing through a dam that had been holding for too long. Images surged through his mind without warning, fragments at first, then whole moments, nights filled with quiet warmth, Eli in his arms, the soft rise and fall of his breathing, the way he would unconsciously reach for him even in sleep, the promises he had never spoken out loud but had carried in every action. "Eli," Cale whispered, his voice unsteady, his entire body tensing as the weight of those memories crashed down on him, his knees giving out beneath him as he dropped, one hand clutching his head, his breath uneven. "I remember." The words were broken, fragile, but real, and for the first time since everything had begun, the truth returned all at once. Not just the love, but the mistake, the choice, the moment he had turned away. Cale lowered his head, his shoulders shaking slightly, the control he had always maintained slipping away completely. He was no longer the alpha who commanded everything. He was just a man who had destroyed something he could never replace. Slowly, he bowed forward, his posture collapsing into something raw and unguarded, his voice rough as he forced the words out. "I am sorry. Please give me a chance to fix this." The silence that followed was heavier than anything before. Eli did not move at first. He stood there, his arms instinctively holding the child closer, his expression unreadable, but the softness that once defined him was gone, replaced by something distant, something tired. He took a small step back, not out of fear, but out of instinct, as if closing the distance between them would reopen wounds that had barely begun to heal. "Do you know what I went through?" Eli's voice finally broke the silence, quiet at first, but steady, each word carrying a weight that Cale could not escape. "Do you know what it felt like to be alone?" Cale's hands tightened against the floor, his chest constricting as he listened, unable to look up, because he already knew there was no defense, no excuse that could erase what had happened. "You were not there," Eli continued, his voice trembling now, not from weakness, but from everything he had held back for too long. "Not once. Not when I needed you. Not when I was carrying your child." The words hit harder than any accusation, each one settling deep, leaving no room to breathe. Cale's voice cracked as he tried to respond. "I did not know. I could not. You could have." Eli cut in, his tone sharper now, the first real edge breaking through. "If you had just looked. If you had just questioned what they said. Even once." Eli's gaze did not waver, his eyes bright, but dry, refusing to let the tears fall. "But you did not. You chose to believe them. You chose to push me away, like I meant nothing." Cale's head dropped lower, his hands curling tightly, the weight of those words pressing down on him with no escape. "I was wrong," he said, his voice breaking completely now, stripped of everything but truth. I was a fool. I destroyed everything. But please, do not take away my chance to make it right. For a moment, Eli closed his eyes, as if fighting something within himself, something that still refused to disappear completely, because despite everything, despite the pain, a part of him still remembered the man Cale had been. But when he opened them again, that softness was gone. He shook his head slowly, his voice quiet, but final. It is too late. And in that moment, Cale understood that remembering was not enough, because some things, once broken, did not return simply because you wished them to. Cale did not leave after that day, and he did not disappear like before. Instead, he stayed, not with power, not with control, but with quiet persistence that Eli could not ignore no matter how hard he tried. Every morning, before the sun fully rose over the ocean, Cale would stand outside the small art shop, a simple container of food in his hands, something he had prepared himself, waiting without knocking, without forcing his way in. I just want to see him, he would say softly when Eli finally opened the door, his voice careful, stripped of all authority, as if even speaking too loudly might push everything further away. Some days, Eli said nothing and closed the door. Some days, he let him stay for a few minutes. And some days, Cale stood there for hours, unmoving, watching quietly through the glass as Noah played inside, his expression unreadable but his eyes never leaving the child. Even when the weather turned, when rain fell steadily from gray skies and soaked through his clothes, Cale did not leave. He stood there, silent, patient, as if enduring it was the only way he could prove something words never could. Eli saw everything, every small effort, every quiet apology that was never spoken out loud. And still, it was not enough. Each time his heart softened, the memories returned just as quickly, sharp and unforgiving, reminding him of nights spent alone, of fear, of pain, of a silence that had almost broken him completely. You cannot forget that, Eli whispered to himself more than once, his hand resting protectively over Noah as he watched Cale from a distance. You cannot pretend it did not happen. But even then, something inside him had already begun to shift, slowly, almost unwillingly. Until the day everything changed again. The afternoon had been quiet, the kind of calm that made the ocean seem endless and peaceful, the wind soft as Eli walked along the coastal road, Noah's small hand held securely in his own. For a moment, everything felt normal, almost safe. Then it happened too fast to fully understand. A sudden sound, a shift in the air. Eli barely had time to react before a force pulled him backward, strong arms wrapping around both him and Noah, turning sharply, shielding them completely. The world seemed to stop for a fraction of a second. Then everything moved again. Eli found himself on the ground, his breath uneven, his arms tightening instinctively around Noah, who was unharmed, safe against his chest. But Cale was a few feet away, his body still, his breathing shallow, a thin line of blood visible along his temple. Cale, Eli's voice broke. As he rushed forward, the name escaping him without thought, without restraint, as if all the walls he had built had shattered in a single instant. His hands trembled as he reached for him, carefully lifting his head, his heart pounding uncontrollably. Why would you do that? Eli whispered, his voice shaking, fear and something deeper mixing together in a way he could not separate. Cale's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then finding Eli, and despite everything, despite the pain, he managed a faint, almost relieved smile. You are both safe, he murmured, his voice weak but steady. That is all that matters. In that moment, something inside Eli cracked, not completely, not enough to erase everything that had happened, but enough to let something else through, something he had tried to bury for so long. He did not push Cale away this time. He did not turn his back. Instead, he helped him up, his movements careful, his silence no longer as cold as before, and though he did not say the words, something had changed, something fragile, something uncertain, but real. Eli did not say that he forgave him, not out loud, not in any way that could be clearly defined, but he also did not step back this time, did not pull away when Cale stayed close. And that silent change was enough for Cale to understand that something fragile had shifted between them. A breath he did not realize he had been holding finally eased, his movements becoming more careful, more deliberate, as if everything from this point forward had to be handled with absolute care. Let me take you home, Cale said softly, his voice steady but gentle, Nothing like the man Eli had once known in that cold, distant world. This time, when Eli did not refuse, Cale felt something inside him come back to life. The penthouse was no longer the same when they returned. It did not feel like a place of control anymore, no longer a space defined by silence and distance, but something warmer, something lived in, something that slowly began to resemble a home rather than a prison of expectations. Small changes appeared without announcement. Softer lighting, the scent of food in the kitchen, the quiet sound of Noah's laughter filling spaces that had once been empty. Cale did not force anything. He did not demand forgiveness. Instead, he stayed close in the simplest ways, preparing meals, adjusting his schedule, sitting beside Noah in the evenings, his voice low and calm as he spoke to him like he used to, as if trying to rebuild something that had been lost piece by piece. "Did you have a good day?" Cale asked one night, his tone gentle as Noah leaned against him, small hands playing with the edge of his sleeve. Eli watched from a distance, silent, his chest tightening in a way he could not fully explain. At the same time, Cale worked quietly in the background, his focus sharp, his determination unwavering. He traced every detail, every inconsistency, every hidden connection, until the truth surfaced clearly, the people responsible for everything that had happened revealed without doubt. And this time, Cale did not hesitate. He removed every threat with precision, ensuring that nothing and no one could ever come close to Eli and Noah again. "You will never be in danger because of me again," he said one evening, his voice low but firm, standing near Eli without crossing the distance between them. Time passed slowly, but it passed differently. The tension that once filled every moment began to ease, replaced by something quieter, something more stable. Eli still remembered everything. The pain did not disappear, it never fully could, but it no longer felt as sharp, no longer controlled every breath he took. Instead, something else began to return, something familiar, something warm, something he had thought was lost forever. One night, as Eli stood in the kitchen, watching Cale help Noah settle down for bed, he let out a quiet breath, his hand resting lightly against the counter as his gaze softened just slightly. "You have changed," Eli said quietly, not accusing, not questioning, just stating what he could see. Cale paused, looking up at him, his expression calm, but sincere. "No," he answered after a moment, his voice steady. "I am just finally doing what I should have done from the beginning." And for the first time in a long time, Eli did not turn away. Happiness does not always come back the way you remember it. Sometimes, it returns quietly, asking if you are ready to believe in it again. Months passed without anyone noticing exactly when things stopped feeling fragile and started feeling real. The mornings became softer, filled with sunlight that spilled through the windows, warming every corner of the space that had once felt distant and cold. Eli stood in the kitchen, one hand resting gently over his abdomen, his fingers moving in small, absent circles as if connecting with the life growing within him, his expression calm, thoughtful, no longer weighed down by the same sharp pain that had once followed him everywhere. "You are growing fast," Eli murmured softly, a faint smile forming as he glanced down, his voice carrying a warmth that had taken time to return. Behind him, footsteps approached, familiar now, steady and unhurried, and before he could turn, Cale's arms wrapped around him from behind, careful, intentional, his hold firm but gentle in a way that spoke louder than any apology he had ever made. This time, there was no hesitation, no unconscious instinct guiding the movement. It was a choice, a promise. Cale lowered his head slightly, resting it near Eli's shoulder, his voice quiet but certain. "I am here," he said, each word deliberate, as if he wanted Eli to feel the meaning behind them, not just hear them. Eli did not pull away. Instead, he leaned back just slightly, allowing that closeness, allowing himself to accept it without fear, something he had not been able to do before. In the living room, Noah's laughter filled the space, bright and carefree as he ran across the floor, his small voice echoing as he called out, "Look at me," his energy filling the home with a kind of life that could not be replaced. Cale's gaze softened as he watched him, one hand instinctively moving to rest over Eli's, both of them connected in a quiet, shared understanding that needed no explanation. "Slow down," Cale called gently, a faint smile appearing, something rare but real. "You are going to fall." "No, I am not," Noah replied confidently, laughing as he kept moving, his happiness simple and untouched by everything that had come before. Eli watched them both, his chest tightening slightly, Not with pain this time, but with something deeper, something steadier, something that felt like peace. For a long moment, he said nothing, simply taking it in, the warmth, the voices, the presence of a family he had once thought he would never have again. Then, quietly, almost to himself, he whispered, "This is enough." Kale heard him. He did not respond. Immediately, only tightening his hold slightly, a silent acknowledgement, a quiet promise that he would not let this slip away again. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, Eli allowed himself to believe it. Not completely without fear, not without remembering what had been lost, but enough to take that step forward, enough to trust what was in front of him now. The past did not disappear. It never would, but it no longer defined everything. As the sunlight filled the room and Noah's laughter continued to echo, Eli closed his eyes for just a moment, letting himself feel it fully, the warmth, the safety, the quiet certainty that this time, they would hold on to it. And this time, they would not lose it again.